The number in the Drassian grain ledger was too round, and Amelia Veratis had spent her whole life learning that in the Consortium's arithmetic, round numbers are where the bodies are buried. She sat in the reading room of the Veratis compound in Vaca with the copied page flat under her hands and a single lamp burning low. Because she preferred to do this work in the dark, alone, where the only witness to her thinking was her own reflection in the black window. She was 34 years old, in the plain gray working clothes she wore when no one important would see her. The copper-threaded black stayed on their hangers for rooms that mattered, and her long dark hair was pulled back off a face that her family's enemies described, in the reports they thought she never saw, as disarmingly warm and precisely nothing of the kind. The warmth was real. So was the precision. People made the mistake of thinking they had to choose. The page was a projection of Drassian grain exports for the coming 2 years, and it was a lie. Not in any figure she could point to, the Drassian accountants were far too good for that, but in its shape. 3 winters of Eastern harvest reports which her people had assembled from the edges, dock hands, granary clerks, a factor's mistress in Orvath who liked to talk. Set beside the official projection, the two did not describe the same world. The official world grew steadily and sold widely. The real world was losing its eastern farmland to something the reports called weather and blight and reorganization, and was quietly, carefully, running short. And a family that grows the world's bread and is about to run short of it does not simply raise prices. It chooses who eats. Amelia turned the lamp up a quarter and looked at the coastline of small dependent cities down the projection's distribution column, and found the one she had come looking for, the one the whole long night in the dark had been walking toward. Vaca, her own city. Listed for a grain contract on generous terms, renewable with a financing clause attached, Drassian grain, de Sangrava credit, delivered cheap and steady for 2 winters running, until Vaca's own farm islands stopped being worth the labor and the granaries emptied of anything but the Consortium's charity. And then in the 3rd winter, the terms would change, because the terms always change in the 3rd winter, and by then a city does not argue with the hand that feeds it. It votes the way the hand prefers. It opens the harbors the hand wants opened. It stops being a place the Veratis family can trade from freely, and starts being a place the Consortium owns without ever having fired a shot. "There you are," Amelia said softly to the number. "I've been looking for you for 4 years." It was the proposal her intelligence had touched twice and never fully seen, one of exactly 2 Consortium plays in her whole career that had slipped through her hands with only its edges felt. She had it now entire in a copied ledger and 3 winters of harvest gossip, and it was going to the session table in Astra in 11 days, where 4 of the 5 families would nod it through as ordinary business, because to them it was ordinary business, the most ordinary business in the world. She took it to Con Veratis in the counting hall the next morning, in the blacks now, because this was a room that mattered. Con was the family's head of trade in Vaca, and the nearest thing Amelia had to a superior who could tell her no. A compact, silver-templed man of 60, who had run Veratis interests on the Morning Coast for 30 years, and had a stillness about him that people mistook for slowness, until it was too late. He heard her out standing at the tall windows, the gray lake light on his face, and when she had finished he was quiet for a long moment, doing the same arithmetic she had done, arriving where she had arrived. "How long," Con said, "from the first cheap contract to the 3rd winter terms?" 2 winters, perhaps a little more if the harvest is kind. Amelia laid the projection on his table. "It isn't a threat, Con, that's what makes it dangerous. Nobody points a blade at Vaca. Somebody offers it cheap bread in a hard season and it says yes because saying yes is sane, and in 2 years the granaries are dependent and the farm islands are fallow and the harbor votes the way Orvath prefers. There is no moment anyone can point to and call it an attack. There's only a city that ate well for 2 winters and woke up owned." "And the number," Con said, "because the family will ask me for the number." 40,000 people in Vaca, Amelia said. "The farm islands feed a little more than half of them, the rest we buy in on our own terms from our own roots. This contract makes us buy it all from theirs. Inside 3 winters, every loaf in the city is Drassian grain moved onto Sangrava credit, and the day the Consortium wants Vodka to do a thing, they do not send an army. They send a shipping delay. A week of empty granaries in midwinter, and any council in the world does what it's told. She let that sit. That's the number, Khan. It's 40,000 people, and the price of their independence is a warehouse of grain we don't control. Khan looked at the projection a long time. The family cannot outbid the Drassian grain operation, he said. You know that. Nobody can. That's their whole power, there is no counteroffer. You cannot beat cheap bread with expensive bread. No, Amelia agreed. You can't, so we don't beat the offer. We poison the table it's served on. She placed a second page beside the first, her own hand this time, a diagram of 5 seats and the lines of interest running between them. The proposal passes on a majority. 4 families nod it through as routine. But it goes to the session inside an audit year, Khan, the collective audit, the one that's supposed to make all 5 families show each other their books. And I have spent 4 years learning what each of those 5 families is hiding from the other 4. The Drassian grain proposal only looks routine because nobody at that table knows what the other seats know. My work is to make sure that at least 3 of them do before the vote. I'm going to Astra. The stillness came over Khan entirely then. The stillness Amelia had learned to read as the opposite of calm. Astra, he said. Their city, their bank, their vaults, their sessions, their ground. A Veratis, walking into the one place in the world built so that 5 families can watch each other, and doing intelligence work in the middle of it. If they take you inside that city, Amelia, there is no ransom coat that climbs those walls. There is no negotiation. You would simply become a thing that did not arrive. I know the ground, Amelia said. Better than they'll expect, and I won't be doing anything they can name. I'm going to attend the pre-session receptions, as the family is entitled to do, and I'm going to have quiet conversations with people who already want to have them, and I'm going to make sure the right seats learn the right truths about each other at exactly the wrong time. That's not a crime, Khan, that's a party. She almost smiled. The blades are for the ground floor. I don't expect to need them. You always say that. And I'm usually right, said Amelia, which is the only reason you let me go. Astra rose out of the platinum sea like a proof, rather than a city. And Amelia stood at the rail of the Veratis coaster, as it came into the great harbor, and understood, again, why she hated it, and why the hatred was a kind of respect. There was no waterfront squalor. That was the first thing, and it told you everything. Every other port in the world wore its poverty at the water's edge. Astra had no poverty to wear, because Astra had no one it did not choose to have. The quays were pale dressed stone, laid true, swept clean, the bollards iron and identical. The warehouses behind them stood in ranked rows, roofs level to the inch, each one lettered and numbered in the same restrained hand. Beyond them, the city climbed in tiers of grey stone and dark slate to the 3 great buildings that were its whole reason. The Sessions House, the bank, the vault complex, built not to impress but to reassure, in the aesthetic of people who did not need to prove anything and had made a 2-century art of the not proving. Nothing gilded. Nothing tall for tallness. Everything excellent. It was the most expensive statement of confidence Amelia had ever seen, and it was aimed at exactly one audience, which was anyone thinking of betting against the people who had built it. She went ashore in the copper-threaded blacks, hair loose, the bronze clasp at her belt catching the flat sea light, a Veratis attending the sessions openly and correctly, and she felt the city's attention find her at the customs house and stay on her all the way up the tiers. That was fine. That was expected. In Astra you were watched the way you were housed, excellently, permanently, and with perfect manners. Her first contact was waiting where he was always waiting, which was somewhere he had a reason to be. Renkala found her on the bank terrace on the second evening. At the reception the Solvar family gave every audit year. A spare, elderly man with a scholar's stoop and a courtier's eyes, 61 years old, who had run the de Sangrava intelligence operation in all but name for 5 years on the strength of a promise to a dying man. He and Amelia had never worked together. They had spent a decade reading each other's work, which was a deeper acquaintance than most friendships. The famous Amelia Veratis, Renkala said, taking a glass he did not drink from. In Astra, in audit year, at the Solvar reception. You'll forgive an old man for finding that more interesting than the wine. The wine is excellent, Amelia said. It's Astra, everything is excellent. That's what makes the place so tiring, you can never tell the good from the merely flawless. She let her eyes move across the terrace, the ranked excellent people, and brought them back to him. How is Marco, Ren? It was a blade, gently drawn, and he felt it. The young de Sangrava head's condition was the family's most guarded wound, and her knowing it was a way of telling him exactly how much she saw. His courtier's eyes did not change, which was its own confirmation. Marco is managing his responsibilities, Ren Kala said smoothly. As we all are. What are you managing, Amelia? Because you did not come to Astra to ask after my principal's health. No, she agreed. I came because in 9 days your family is going to be asked to extend credit for a Drassian grain contract, and I don't think anyone has told you what the grain is actually for, or what state the fields that are supposed to grow it are actually in. I think you're being asked to finance a house's problem and call it an opportunity. She smiled, warm and precise. But we can talk about the wine, if you'd rather. Ren Kala turned his untouched glass a slow quarter turn on the terrace rail, watching the sea go dark below the bank, and when he spoke his voice had lost the courtier's music and become something flatter and older. You understand what you're doing, he said. You're a Veratis, telling a consortium seat that another consortium seat is lying to it. If I take that seriously, I've let the family's rival set 2 of the 5 families against each other. If I dismiss it, and you're right, my principal lends good credit against a harvest that isn't coming, and the loss lands on me, because everything lands on me now. He let that admission sit. Everything lands on me now. The nearest a man like Ren Kala came to naming the wound, that he was carrying the whole de Sangrava operation on a dead man's promise, while its young head drank himself past use. So I have to ask the ugly question. Why would you help me, Amelia? Your family gains nothing from the de Sangrava seat keeping its money. My family gains a great deal, Amelia said, but not the thing you're looking for. I'm not helping you, Ren. I wouldn't insult you by pretending to. I'm telling you a true thing because a table that knows the truth votes differently than a table that doesn't, and a different vote happens to serve vodka. You'll check what I've said, because you're too good not to. And when you find it's true, the eastern fields, the suppressed reports, the harvest that grows on paper and nowhere else, you'll do whatever serves de Sangrava, and it will not be because I asked you to. That's the only kind of help worth giving a spymaster. The kind he can verify and then pretend he found himself. The old man looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind the courtier's eyes that might, in a younger man, have been respect. You're very like someone I used to read, Ren Kala said quietly. The same hand, the gift, and the exact same trick of making the mark do the wanting. He set the glass down. He worked your side of the board once. I don't suppose you'd know the man. Amelia kept her face still, warm, precise, empty. And it cost her more than she let him see, because she knew exactly which man he meant. And the fact that Ren Kala had reached for that comparison, here now, was a small cold note she would remember later and wish she had heard louder. Astra's full of clever men, she said. Check the fields, Ren, that's all I ask. The wine really is excellent. And she left him at the rail with the true thing in his hands, and did not look back, because looking back was a tell, and because her heart was beating harder than a party warranted. Over the next 6 days, Amelia Veratis built a hand of cards in the enemy's own house, one careful conversation at a time, and the audience should understand exactly what each card was, because the whole game would turn on them. The first card was Ren Kala, and it was not yet turned. She had told him a true thing, that the Drassian grain the proposal promised did not exist in the fields it claimed, and she had watched the old spymaster file it, the way she filed things without acting, because acting on a rival's gift is how you get made into a rival's instrument. He would check it. That was the point. He had the reach to check it, and when he found it true, The de Sangrava seat would arrive at the session already knowing it was being asked to lend against a harvest that was failing. She had not turned him. She had handed him a reason to turn himself. The second card was the audit. Amelia spent a full day in the bank's public gallery, where the audit schedule was posted as a matter of Consortium transparency, reading it the way she read everything, for shape. The collective audit was the one mechanism in the Consortium designed to force the 5 families to show each other their books, and it had already been narrowed twice this year at Drassian request, quiet procedural adjustments that reduced the scope of what the Eastern grain operation would have to disclose. Twice. A family that has nothing to hide does not spend its scarce Consortium goodwill narrowing an audit twice. She copied the amendment record with her own eyes and her trained memory, and she understood that the audit could not be narrowed a third time without every seat at the table noticing the pattern, which meant the Drassian secret had a clock on it, and the clock was the session itself. The third card was the most dangerous, and she went for it last, and she went for it in person, because some cards you cannot send for. His name was Tavan Aldenmere, not the family head, a cousin, a mid-tier factor who managed the Aldenmere timber accounts through the Astra bank. A soft, worried man of perhaps 40 in a good coat gone slightly shiny at the cuffs, with the particular sweat of someone living a rung above his means. The de Sangrava leverage files noted a gambling debt he was quietly servicing and had never used it, because he was too small to be worth the spending. Amelia did not use it either. She arranged, instead, to be at the next counting desk when he came to reconcile the timber accounts, and to notice, truthfully, because it was there, that a clerk had transposed 2 figures 3 columns apart in a way that would, by the next quarter, have shown as a shortfall in Tavan Aldenmere's own ledger. The kind of shortfall a nervous cousin gets blamed for whether or not he caused it. "Forgive me," she said, low, leaning as if to read her own page. "Your column 4, the carry from the Velascara consignment. It's been entered against the wrong quarter there and there. It isn't a loss, it's a clerk's slip. But it will read as a loss on your accounts before it reads as a slip, and by then you'll have spent a month explaining it." Tavan Aldenmere looked where she pointed, and went pale, and then flooded with a relief so total it was almost painful to watch, because she had just lifted a fear he had been carrying without even knowing its shape. He glanced at her blacks, the bronze clasp, and the relief curdled into wariness as he placed the family. "Your Veratis. What do you want for this?" "Nothing," Amelia said, and gathered her own papers, and it was the truth, which was what made it work. "I noticed it, and telling you cost me a sentence. Astra's an expensive city to be blamed in. Get it corrected before the quarter closes." And she rose and left him there, having done him a real kindness for no visible price, in a city where nothing was ever done for free. It is a strange truth of intelligence work, and Amelia had built a career on it. Leverage makes people do what you want and hate you for it, and a single unbought kindness in a city of perfect transactions makes them wonder, for years, whether they owe you. She did not want Tavan Aldenmere to do anything now. She wanted him to remember, at the right moment, that the Veratis woman had been decent to him once, so that when the Aldenmere seat sat at a divided table, there would be one small warm thing waiting it her way, from a direction no one would think to guard. By the 7th evening she had it, or believed she had it. A de Sangrava seat about to discover it was financing a failing harvest, an audit clock the Drassian secret could not survive, and a thread into the Aldenmere seat that could tip a divided table. 3 of the 5, turned or turning, before a vote that only needed a majority to be denied. She stood at the window of her rooms in the Veratis factory house, high on the 3rd tier, and looked out over the perfect grey city with the sea beyond it going to pewter in the dusk, and allowed herself, for one moment, the dangerous feeling of a plan that was working. That was the moment the knock came at her door, soft and correct, in a city where nothing happened by accident. The man at the door was a bank functionary in the bank's restrained grey, and he carried a single sealed folder, and he was very polite. "Madame Veratis," The administrator's office presents its compliments and asks that you review the enclosed at your convenience in advance of the sessions as a courtesy between the city and its guests. He bowed precisely and was gone before she could do more than take the folder, which was itself a message. Whatever this was, it did not require her answer. It required only that she know it. Amelia carried the folder to the lamp and opened it, and the perfect city tilted very slightly under her feet. It was her own hand of cards, laid face up. Not accused, not threatened, documented. A single dry summary page in the bank's restrained style, noting as a courtesy, purely informationally, that the family's guest had held conversations of a commercial intelligence character with a de Sangrava advisor, had reviewed the audit amendment record in the public gallery, and had taken an interest in the accounts of a junior Aldenmere factor. Every card. Named, dated, in order. Nothing she had done was a crime. The folder said so, in effect, by declining to call it one. It simply demonstrated that all three of her careful, deniable, patient moves had been watched from the moment she stepped off the coaster, and assembled, and handed back to her with the compliments of the house, a full day before the session, so that she would arrive at the table knowing that the table already knew. She sat down slowly in the excellent chair, in the excellent room, and made herself do the thing she was best at, which was think when thinking hurt. This was not the city's ordinary watching. The city watched everyone, that was expected. She had built her plan around being watched and staying inside the lines. This was targeted. Someone had known which three threads she would pull before she pulled them, had known the de Sangrava angle, the audit angle, the Aldenmere angle, the specific shape of a plan she had not written down anywhere but her own skull. You did not assemble that from watching a woman walk a city for 6 days. You assembled it from knowing how she thought, from knowing her method, from having, somewhere in the machine, the pattern of Amelia Veratis's mind. And there was exactly one person, outside the Veratis family, who had ever had that. She did not let herself say his name, even in the privacy of her own head, for a long moment, because saying it made it real. And real meant that the wound the family did not speak of, the brother who had gone over the wall years ago and out of every account, was not a closed chapter but an open channel, and had been perhaps this whole time. The leverage she had spent 6 days building was not merely known. It was preempted. Someone had read her hand, not because they were watching the table, but because they had been taught the game by the one other person alive who played it the way she did. She turned the lamp down to nothing, and sat in the dark of the excellent room a long time before she slept, and did not sleep well. At the door, before dawn, one more courtesy waited, because Astra never let a message land without making sure you understood who had sent it. The city administrator received her in a plain grey room in the bank complex, at an hour that was neither day nor night. Over tea she did not touch. He was a spare, unremarkable man of middle age with the most carefully selected face in the surviving world, the one person all 5 families had agreed to trust, which meant he served none of them and all of them, and was therefore the only truly neutral instrument in Astra, and the most dangerous. He did not accuse her of anything. He poured the tea himself. "I wanted to be sure the folder didn't alarm you, madam," he said mildly. "It isn't a warning. Astra doesn't warn its guests. That would imply we might do something, and we don't do things. We only observe them very well, and occasionally we let a guest know how well, as a professional courtesy. You've done nothing against the city's rules. I'd have said so in the folder if there were room for doubt." "Then why hand it back to me at all?" Amelia said. "If I've broken nothing, you could have simply let me play a hand you'd already read and watched me lose at the table. That would have been cleaner." "It would," the administrator agreed. "And if the interest in your visit were mine, that is exactly what I'd have done, said nothing, and enjoyed the session." He set down his cup with great precision. "But the request that your movements be compiled and returned to you did not originate in this office, madam. It came to me correctly, through the proper channel, from a party entitled to make it, with instructions that you be shown the compilation before the vote. I don't know why a party would want you to know you'd been read rather than simply beating you with it. That's not my arithmetic. I only keep the city's rules, and the rules were kept." He rose. "But in 20 years of this work, I've only ever seen one reason a hunter shows the quarry the trap in advance. It's when the hunter doesn't want a win. It's when the hunter wants the quarry to know who set it. And he saw her to the door courteously, and left her standing in the pale Astra dawn with the last of her certainty gone, because a stranger who has read your files beats you quietly, and only one kind of person shows you the trap so you'll know his hand. The kind who wants to be recognized. The kind who wants you to know he's still out there, still playing your side of the board, still close enough to reach into the enemy's own city and lay your mind out on a page. Family. Amelia Veratis walked back up the tiers in the gray light, with the whole shape of it settling on her at last, and understood two things with total clarity. The first was that her leverage was gone, every card in her hand already seen, every turned seat already warned, the plan she had come to Astra to execute dead on arrival, and only now being handed its notice. The second was worse and colder, and she held it against the pewter sea for a long time before she let herself finish it. The leak was not a rumor, and it was not old, and it was not closed. It had a name she had refused to say. And it meant that everything she did in this city from now forward would be read by someone who had learned to think the way she thought. Which meant the only way to save Vaca now was to win a vote in 4 days, on the enemy's ground, with a hand her own brother had already seen, by doing the one thing he would never predict her to do. She did not yet know what that was. The sea went from pewter to silver as the sun cleared the warehouses, and Amelia Veratis stood on the 3rd tier of the most controlled city in the world, and began, card by ruined card, to build a second hand out of the wreckage of the first.